our next guest, our friend David Hale, ESPN's ACC writer. And David, there's plenty to talk about today. I think we got to talk about lawsuits, and we got to talk about, court settlements and judges and that. But the Pop-Tarts Bowl is more interesting. That may have been the best content to come out of Media Day last week. Is there any competition? Are they definitively the best bowl game now? It's the best thing I've found out of ACC kickoff last week.
Yeah, no, I fully concur with this. And for those who were not aware, the Pop-Tarts Bowl hosted a Pop-Tarts and beer pairing event at ACC kickoff. And I endorse the bowl wholeheartedly. I think everyone should be aiming to attend this bowl. I highly encourage everyone to go out there and purchase their Pop-Tarts. But beer pairings, you really can't go wrong. And look, do I think that, the Duke's Mayo Bowl should do a beer pairing event? No. Beer and mayo do not go together. But I see no reason, frankly, that, the Lockheed Martin Military Bowl can't, pair a beer and destroyer-class battleship. Just decide, see which ones go best together. So that's, look, I think more bowls could take a page from what Pop-Tarts is doing, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, beer pairing with an airplane hangar. I mean, you take a tour of the facility.
I see no downside. What could go wrong with heavy artillery and beer pairings? I see no downside.
No, I think until we try it out, we're not going to know the answer to that, so we need to get on that. So as I've said, my hope for Syracuse this year is why not go make the Pop-Tarts Bowl, and then we can all have a good time. But I don't know where you're at right now, David. Obviously, practice is starting throughout the league, but there's still all this other crap going on, right? Lawsuits are going on. There's this House settlement, I think, is going to affect things in different ways than people maybe realized a month or two ago. Where's your attention divided these days between the football and the other stuff going on?
Yeah, frankly, I'm excited to be talking about football and actually being able to think about real on-the-field football, because this has been just a mind-numbingly awful off-season. But I feel like we say this about every off-season now. I mean, the legal stuff is not going away anytime soon. And as Jim Phillips, I think, made quite clear in his speech at ACC kickoff, this is a battle to the bitter end for the ACC. They are not looking for an out. They are not looking for a settlement. They are going to the mattresses, to steal a phrase from The Godfather. So, the timeline that I've heard before we're even in court discussing facts and arguments is probably December. So this is a thing that's going to be looming over the entirety of football season. You mentioned the House settlement, and I don't blame anyone who is a fan of college football for only peripherally paying attention to this, because it has been it's a lot of minutia. I think most people understand the sort of top-level issue, which is this will allow for revenue sharing. What does that mean? What does it mean for rosters? What does it mean for NIL and collectives? What does it mean for how much players are actually going to get put in their pocket by schools? The answer is I don't think anybody knows. And I have talked to dozens of athletics directors and coaches who are sort of taking best guesses, but do not have any strong understanding yet of exactly how this will work. And frankly, assuming this settlement comes through and people have voiced objections, but assuming it happens, I think there's immediately going to be another slew of lawsuits, starting with Title IX folks who are going to say, whoa, how is this going to work? Several top collectives have already threatened lawsuits. This is not an end. It is just a different chapter in the just endless litigation that comes with the fact that the NCAA for 70 years now has largely ignored elephants in the room, to the point that the elephants overcrowded the entire room, and now all we have is a room full of elephant dung, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way to. It's evocative, but it certainly describes what we got going on.
I'm a writer after all.
Yeah, you got to use good lingo, and the $20 million that schools are going to essentially have to distribute. If you're a major school and you're not paying out $20 million, I don't even know what you're going to do. That's the part we all knew about. The part that kind of I didn't realize this was happening until a week and a half ago. The roster manipulation that it sounds like is coming here. That there could be upwards of 20 more scholarships per team for football, which is it's interesting on the field and recruiting and in transfer portal. It's also interesting, like schools do their budgets all completely differently. Like that's a big number to absorb in budgets, depending on how you're doing it. Like that feels like whoa, that's a way bigger meatball than something little that gets slipped by in something like this.
Yeah, no doubt. So I'll give the very Cliff's Notes version of this. So basically, this House settlement says that the NCAA can no longer enforce scholarship limits, which we were operating under 85 scholarships per FBS institution. That can't be enforced anymore. There are no limits to scholarships. So in that case, any school could offer 300 scholarships for football if they wanted to. But nobody really wants to do that because it would be incredibly expensive. So the workaround that they have come up with is to put a cap on roster size. So rosters, as opposed to scholarships, are considered a competitive equity, not a benefit to athletes. So they're basically saying, okay, we are allowed to limit rosters. So what's the number? Well, first they wanted to say the number is going to be 85. And every coach in America said, I can't practice with 85 guys. It's not the NFL. You can't go out and pick up free agents. We need enough players to go through practice. We need to deal with the transfer portal at the end of the year. We need to deal with attrition and all of these things. So they said, all right, we'll figure out a different number. The number that most likely is going to happen is 105, maybe 106. So let's just say, for sake of argument, 105. Well, as you note, any school worth their salt that wants to say we're competing at the highest level is not going to stick at 85 scholarships. They're going to go to 105 and give everybody a scholarship. Well, let's just say every Power 4 school does that. You're now looking at about 1,300 to 1,400 new scholarships in 1 year at the Power 4 level. That's an insane amount of scholarships suddenly available for anybody who can fight their way onto a roster. A ton of ripple effects to this. Like, what is it going to do to the group of five, who's probably going to see a huge influx of folks into the portal who can now get a roster spot at the Power 4 level? What's it going to do to their recruiting? And most coaches don't even know how this is going to work yet. So they're already recruiting for next year and trying to plan their roster for next year, and they don't even know what the rosters are going to look like. So it's madness. And, one of the upshots of all of this, as Dabo Sweeney was pounding his fist about last week at ACC Kickoff, is if everybody goes to 105 at the Power 4 level, say goodbye to walk-ons at the Power 4. There is no walk-ons anymore. And I think, there's been a lot of really good ones over the years who have been great stories, including Dabo. And I think it's a shame to see those going away as well.
And I think, as David Hale's with us from ESPN, the part that's interesting to me is, especially once you factor in the transfer portal into the mix of this, I don't know, how many people are going to want to be. Are you going to want to be, if you're a legit player, right? Are you going to want to be 95th on Clemson's roster? And you're not playing, that would be normally a walk-on type, or do you want to go to another school where you're playing? And I think this is, the roster churn out of all of this is going to be just stunning to look at, I'd imagine, if this happens in the next year or two.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see the transfer portal basically double in size when this takes effect. And to your point, look, I have asked a number of guys, what would you do in this situation? Guys who have been either are at the group of five level now or have gone from group of five to Power 5 or vice versa. If this was presented to you coming out of high school, would you have gone to be the 95th guy at a Power 4 school or the 45th guy on a roster at the group of five level? And I will say there's mixed answers to that, but the majority, I think, would say, honestly, I'd probably go to the Power 4 level. And most of that comes from the fact that, look, you've got some ego coming out. You don't know what you don't know, and you think, it doesn't matter if I'm 95 or 105 or 85 right now. I'll go in, I'll play really well at practice, I'll prove some people wrong, and I'll get some playing time. It's not until you actually go and do it and kind of get kicked in the face a few times that you realize, this is harder, and maybe I'm not the best guy out here. And so what you're going to see is a bunch of guys probably hit the portal after 1 or 2 semesters on campus. I know we're not really talking about academics anymore, but that certainly feels like a problem for anyone who cares about getting a degree, and certainly for schools like Wake Forest, Duke, and I would put Syracuse in this conversation too. That it's not just easy to transfer into these schools, or it's certainly not as easy as it would be for many others. You lose credits along the way. There is just the ripple effects of something like this are really. I mean, it's hard to sort of sum up how big this issue probably could be.
Yes, yet another reason I feel bad for academic coordinators right now, because they got to figure out how those those credits transfer, and it's not a lot of fun. You're calling other schools. So what was this course? What can I call it here? How do we make it count? It's real stuff that's happening to get some third string safety on the football field. It's wild. All right, David. Let's transition sort of to some football here. And the reason I say sort of is because all this stuff and these lawsuits and everything's going on around the ACC. And, I know you were down there covering the football all week long last week, amongst the other stuff. It felt to me, and, you were there, you'd know better. It felt to me like there was a lot of national media there on Monday, heard from the commissioner, and then a lot of the national types, right, like they jetted off to the Big Ten, and the ACC was kind of left to fend for itself. I'm looking at this league right now. It feels like the league, depth-wise, whatnot, competitiveness, it should be a good year in the league. How much is the rest of the country paying attention to the actual football that's going to happen in the ACC this year?
Yeah, you hit on a topic that a number of coaches brought up without much prodding from me, which is that why is the ACC taking a back seat to the Big Ten?
Exactly.
And I'm talking about coaches who have worked in, Bill O'Brien brought this up. Manny Diaz, who was the defensive coordinator at Penn State last year and is at Duke now, brought this up. The Big Ten has the defending national champion, okay, and Ohio State is very good. And I think Penn State is a pretty good team. They brought in teams from the Pac-12 that could be okay. But, again, your point, I think if you look at the ACC right now, you can make a case for probably 7 or 8 teams to be legitimately competitive for a conference championship. And what is almost guaranteed to happen in this new expanded playoff is we're going to get into November when the playoff rankings start coming out, and there's going to be teams from the ACC that are sitting there with 1 loss or maybe 2 losses, and they're going to be having to make their case on why they deserve a playoff spot over a 2 or a 3-loss team from the Big Ten or the SEC, because we're sort of going in with a preconceived notion or narrative that there are 2 leagues at the top and then there's everybody else. And frankly, the ACC and the Big 12 and others have sort of made their bed when they accepted a financial payout or revenue distribution from this new playoff in which the Big Ten and the SEC get more just by default. So, they basically admitted in saying, well, we'll take less money because we know you're better. Well, that's going to trickle down into how people discuss one league versus the other. And Jim Phillips, one of the things that I asked him about when I spoke with him at ACC Kickoff last week, after his very forceful, very impassioned speech to open the ceremonies there, I said, look, is this a thing you need to do more often now, is get out and politic and make a stump speech, not just about the lawsuits, but about the ACC in general? And he said, yeah, I absolutely have to do a better job of that. So I think you're going to see the ACC, its coaches, and certainly commissioner being a little more out front and trying to make the narrative and make the case for the ACC. But look, they're playing an uphill battle here, I think.
Yeah, and okay, with the Big Ten and the SEC is one thing, right? I find it weird, the narrative right now between the ACC and the Big 12. And hey, you mentioned Phillips. Brett Yormark is not afraid to play that game at all in that same job with the Big 12. Is that maybe the biggest issue right now? You look at 2 leagues, and I'm not saying the ACC is better than the Big 12 at football right now, but flip a coin. I don't know what it is. It feels like the national perception is nowhere near flip a coin at this point.
Yeah, look, the Big Ten draws a ton of folks to games, and so they're getting more money on TV, and money doesn't equate to wins, and I think that's the argument they're trying to make there. But set that aside. The Big 10, or the Big 12 and the ACC makes more money, has higher viewership, wins more games, has put more teams into the playoff, wins more championships, has its own network. Go on down the list. Why are things it comes down completely to Brett Yormark is a different cat than Jim Phillips is, and he's more than happy to stand in front of a microphone and tout his league and say whatever crazy thought pops into his mind. And frankly, it was effective. He helped destroy the Pac-12 by doing that. Those 2 leagues are basically jockeying for position over the same future, the same teams. It was, two go in, only one can survive. And the Pac-12 played it conservatively and played it quietly and played it close to the vest and overplayed their hand behind the scenes. But Yormark was out there being a showman, and it worked. And I think it is working in the narrative against the ACC too. And this is, again, I think one of the reasons that Jim Phillips was as forceful as he was last week, because there's frustration that the ACC is continually losing the narrative war again and again and again.
Yeah, it's wild to see, and it detracts from the actual football here. As you said, I'm looking at this league, and, the preseason polls coming out here shortly. I'm sure Florida State will be one. I imagine Clemson will be two. But, they obviously have questions that, like, Florida State's they're not looking like what they looked like last year. Who knows with Clemson right now? I think NC State's going to be really good. Who knows what SMU is going to be coming in? Louisville. Like, we can go on and on and on. What's your sense of the actual football in the league this year?
Yeah, I think you can sort of break it down into a few different tiers. I would say top tier is Clemson and Florida State, because those have been there, done that teams. And they're both very, very talented, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. But I have questions at quarterback on both of them. Like, how good can those guys be? And I think the answer to that question will determine which of those, if either, can really reach that playoff level mountaintop. Then sort of tier 1A or 1B, however you want to look at it, is probably Miami and NC State. And I think those are Miami might have a case as the most talented team, but good Lord knows we have seen this story play out before with Miami, and I don't know how comfortable I am driving the bandwagon right now, but it is a very talented team at Miami. They've gone all in the portal, and they've done a good job. So has NC State. A lot will fall on Grayson McCall and how much he makes that transition from Group of 5 Coastal Carolina to Power 4 quarterback now at NC State. But they got a lot of pieces. And you take a notch down to probably that next tier. I think Virginia Tech's in that conversation. I think Louisville's in that conversation. I think North Carolina's in that conversation. I think all of them have a lot to like and upside, but also some clear sort of fatal flaws that they're not quite there. I at least have some big questions yet. And then I think you go down another tier and say, these guys are still in the conversation. I would not count them out if things really break right. I put Syracuse in that conversation because what Fran Brown has done via the portal and via roster building is really impressive. I worry about some depth, and we haven't seen Fran Brown ever coach a game on the sideline as a head coach on a Saturday yet. So there's questions there. I would say the same is probably true of like an SMU. That's a team that looked pretty good and brings back a lot of talent, but this is going from Group of 5 American to Power 4 ACC. I think is a harder step, and I'm not quite sure, what that means for them in that transition. And then, you probably throw 3 or 4 other teams into that, but I think that's 9 teams out of the 17 right there that I'm going to tell you I wouldn't say have a 0% chance, and probably have, at least a puncher's chance to win the conference.
Lastly here on Syracuse and Fran, before we let you go, as David Hale's with us from ESPN, obviously we'll see the wins and the losses, whatever. When you look at this year from Syracuse, like, what do you want to see out of this season from Fran Brown and this team to, get a sense they're actually heading in the right direction now?
I think there's an entirely good chance that this is a 6-win, 7-win team, which has been the problem. That's basically what got Dino fired, is standing at that win level. But I think if you do it differently than Dino did it, it's going to look a lot better. Mm-hmm. And look, I think there will probably be some growing pains with this Syracuse team. As much as it looks better on paper, you don't play the games on paper, and there's work to be done. And I think when rubber meets the road, you're going to see that there's some lessons that need to be learned the hard way from a team like this. But if this is a team that's finishing strong, that looks better at the end, that isn't shooting itself in the foot again and again and again, that can go out there and pick off a few teams that maybe they wouldn't have beaten in the past, that to me is the story of real progress at Syracuse. So look, if they're 7-6 at the end of the year, do you say, what a waste of a season? They finished basically right where Dino left them. No, I think it entirely depends on how the season plays out, and particularly how the back half of the season plays out, because it hasn't been September and early October that got Dino fired. It was late October and November that got him fired, and that's what needs to change.
Yeah, we've really enjoyed September and October around here. It's that pesky last month of the season that has been a problem for a long, long time. All right, David, always great to chat. I'm sure we'll catch up again when we get closer to the season, but thanks for hopping on.
Right on. Good talking to you guys.
All right, there he is, David Hale. Check out all of his stuff at ESPN. He and Andrea Adelson, they're actually covering the ACC, guys. Darn it, they got it surrounded. So always check him out, ESPN.com. A David Hale joint on Twitter. Follow it, man. You're going to learn something from at A David Hale joint. That is for sure. All right, we'll take a break. I'm watching, what am I watching now? USA 3x3 basketball. It's not going well again for Jimmer. Come on. Glens Falls, get it together. Back after this. Phone line's open as well at 315-437-7644. Back next, Q Sports Talk, ESPN Radio.